It's always exciting to talk to the Independent Institute. Its lighthouse symbol, I think, is particularly relevant today. It's a lighthouse down protecting Silicon Valley from an insidious disease that's spreading through the minds of leading figures, and such as Elon Musk and Larry Page, and these great giants of Silicon Valley seem to be succumbing to a new form of Marxism. And it's very important to have Independent Institute down there with its lighthouse of luminous freedom, liberty, as an answer to this new insidious form of Marxism that's making its way from Palo Alto down around the valley, Milpitas, and all these now famous cities. And the reason I call it a new Marxism is that the essential belief of Karl Marx was that the Industrial Revolution was sort of the climax of human history. You know, that this Industrial Revolution of the 19th century really had solved the human productivity problem. And from then on, the only issue was to be distribution, and that people in a, as Marx himself wrote, could be poets at breakfast, shepherds in the morning, musicians after lunch. I can't remember all the images he presented as indicating the sort of British aristocrat's dream of life beyond toil, life beyond the Industrial Revolution, life beyond the polluted activities of men in trade. It was really, that was his crucial insight. And what we see now in Silicon Valley is a new onset of Marxism, whereby artificial intelligence, robotics, somehow represent, just as the previous Industrial Revolution did to Marx, the new Industrial Revolution of supercomputers and internet connectivity is the final event, the human climax, and it really obsoletes human beings, just as Marx believed that the machines of the machine age essentially obsoleted human beings. So today, the advances of artificial intelligence obsolete human beings, and human labor. You know, the Independent Institute just had been having sessions about a guaranteed annual income, and everybody across Silicon Valley believes this is the only solution. All jobs are going away, except for a few elite programmers with their erudite knowledge of code. And these people will rule the world. And the most popular book in Silicon Valley recently is a book called Homo Deus by an Israeli named Yuval Noah Harari. And it's a great book. He is the Marx of this new revolution, this new age. And he makes all the arguments, and they really sum up what the Google people imagine they're doing. And so it's important, with a new Marxism on its way from a very unexpected source, that people be mobilized to resist this set of preposterous ideas by an industry that can't even figure out passwords, and you know, it's having a nervous breakdown now. From the other point of view, you go on the internet and you immediately Google and Apple and all these companies that all imagine you're their only spouse on the net are asking for passwords and mothers' maiden names and passwords with a combination of letters and numerals, and you know, it's really, they really have totally failed in the crucial role of a network, which is providing security of the data on the network. I mean, if you can't trust anything on the network, it's really not a functioning system. And I would prefer that they plunge seriously into this problem, which I think can be solved by blockchain technology and other approaches before they proceed on to the empyrean of theology and imagine that most of the human race has suddenly become obsolete, about to be usurped by Turing machines, which Turing knew could not usurp human beings. Fundamentally, they can't do it. Turing said that every computer system is necessarily dependent on an oracle. That's why Ellison named his company Oracle. Every computing system is dependent on an oracle, which is outside the system. And he was asked, what is this oracle? Well, the only thing I know about it is that it cannot be a machine. And computers are inherently dependent on intelligence outside the computer, just as Kurt Gödel in 1931, who I think was really the founder of information theory, proved that every logical system, including mathematics, is necessarily dependent on propositions outside the system that cannot be proven within the system. And so, essentially, Gödel was the first great computer scientist, as after Babbage, I guess, and Lovelace. Luckily, attending his speech was the greatest exponent of the opposite view, the view that's now taking over Silicon Valley, that mathematics can be a total and complete system. And mathematics incorporated in digital computer systems can be a complete system. And Hilbert, the great mathematician, believed that this could be accomplished. And his greatest disciple was John von Neumann. And this 1931 meeting in Königsberg was to celebrate the triumphs of the Hilbert agenda for a complete mathematics that could explain everything and yield a kind of Laplacian determinist universe. And that proposition, and von Neumann dropped by this side meeting, and von Neumann had reduced quantum theory better than anybody else to a mathematical scheme. So he was really already recognized as the leading figure in the Hilbert agenda, and instead he went down to this side meeting that Gödel, as a young graduate student, addressed, and he read Gödel's paper and immediately changed his life, which is quite amazing. It shows why John von Neumann was the greatest figure of the 20th century intellect, from my point of view. He could hear a paper by an obscure graduate student, a complex, original proof, and abandoned his previous goals in life and adopt computer science, because he saw that these logical schemes based on oracles could be embodied in machines that could launch a new industrial revolution in service of human beings and in service of creativity. And from this origin came really all the technology of Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley, Dallas. You know, all this technology really did derive from information theory that was launched by von Neumann and then consummated mathematically by Claude Shannon at MIT and Bell Labs, and which learned how to define information and measure it, and thus allow the creation of networks that transacted and communicated information. And the great insight that Shannon had was really also disproves the artificial intelligence dreams of Elon Musk and the other Elmer Gantrys of Silicon Valley. And that you can't, if you have to have an oracle, and the oracle is defined by its ability to generate unexpected bits. In other words, information from the point of view of Shannon is surprise. And that's the crucial insight, that information is surprise. And Albert Hirschman expounded the thesis that human creativity is defined by its surprisal. Human creativity is surprising. If it wasn't surprising, we wouldn't need it, and socialism would work. But so creativity, human creativity is surprisal, and information is surprisal. And you join these two in an economic system, and it has to be free. It has to have a lighthouse of liberty, because it can't be a determinist system. If it's because any logical scheme is necessarily dependent on propositions outside it that can't be reduced to the scheme itself. And all these dreams of artificial intelligence usurping human intelligence miss the essential element of surprise that characterizes all entrepreneurial breakthroughs and advances. And I used to come to Dallas. I used to kind of commute between Silicon Valley and Dallas in the old days when I was writing Microcosm, which was a history in part of Texas Instruments. I told the whole history of Texas Instruments. And Texas Instruments was an important contributor to the overall domains of information technology. Kilby got credit for the integrated circuit, and Patrick Haggerty, who was the key founder of Texas Instruments as an information company, really was a founder of Moore's Law from another point of view, because I believe Moore's Law is essentially just a learning curve. You know, the learning curve shows that with every doubling of total units produced, there's a 20 to 30% reduction in unit costs. That's essentially the learning curve. And Bill Bain of Bain Company came down and worked with Patrick Haggerty, who had come out of naval research, and where they also used learning curve analysis. And together, they applied it to Texas Instruments' integrated circuit and memory business, and they became a dominant company in the entire field. And this is crucial because the great question that I've started with here, with whether the new God really will turn out to be Larry Page, is that the Homo Deus concept can come true, is whether what is wealth? And when I wrote Wealth and Poverty years ago, I pretty much came to the conclusion that wealth is knowledge. And when you think about it, wealth really is knowledge. After all, as Thomas Sowell put it, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the material resources that we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is entirely the growth of knowledge. And if an MIT professor named Cesar Hidalgo has written an interesting book on the subject that comes to the same conclusion. He says that when an expensive car crashes into a wall, all its value disappears, even though every molecule and atom remains. Value is information. The car is knowledge. And if the car is knowledge, if human products are knowledge, wealth is knowledge, what is economic growth? It's learning. And that's really what Bain Company and the Boston Consulting Group and Texas Instruments all worked out way back then at the birth of the semiconductor industry, is that learning curves, and they applied everything to insurance policies, poultry, eggs, microchips, lines of code, whatever it is, they all follow this learning curve of a 20 to 30% drop with every doubling of total units. And the reason Moore's law was such an overwhelming learning curve was that the multiplication of transistors, which was the essential unit, was so fabulously rapid that it generated this every 2-year doubling of computer power. So if in the information theory of capitalism, if wealth is knowledge and growth is learning, then what is money? And this is a really critical issue today, because this was what I actually came here to talk about. And I got distracted by my David always distracts me when I come, so he gets me talking about something else that I didn't plan to talk about. I was going to talk about Trump, right? And the general consensus everywhere that Trump is a terrible threat to prosperity and growth. He threatens to precipitate a trade war, and which, with our experience of the Great Depression, leads to, on both left and right, everybody agrees that trade wars are not favorable to economic growth. And so I too feared Trump as much as anyone else did. And as a matter of fact, I think conservatives focus more on trade than other thinkers. And so probably the threat that Trump posed to world trade was, and perhaps is, especially alarming to conservatives. And and it really does represent a threat, and I was one of the ones more alarmed than most people about the threat that Trump posed. However, I've come to believe that I was wrong, that not just that Trump probably doesn't pose a terrible threat to world trade, but also that the problem that is faced by the world economy really is summed up by this proposition that a capitalist economy is not chiefly an incentive system, you know, where Homo economicus responds to carrots and sticks, stimulus and response, like a Skinner box. Capitalism is an information system. And as an information system, it's one of its most crucial guides is real money. And one of the great threats to our economy is the eclipse of real money. Money is no longer tied to any solid source of value. It can't be a measuring stick because it is more volatile than the economic factors that it measures. And so the information guides and signals of the economy are all muddled by the collapse of money. And when I say the collapse of money, it's summed up by the recent figures from the Bank of International Settlements in Basel that reveals that international currency trading is now $5.1 trillion a day. $5.1 trillion a day, every 24 hours. And these transactions are 25 times bigger than all global GDP. It's maybe 73 times bigger, according to one calculation, than all the trade in goods and services in the world put together. And yet, this currency trading regime fails to yield the one result which it's supposedly designed to achieve, which is stable money, money that can function to measure value across a global economy and thus enable global trade to expand. And global trade has stopped expanding for about 10 years now. It's essentially plateaued. And the reason is this collapse of money. Money is now regarded to be a magic wand for central banks to apply to their economies, rather than a measuring stick that registers real values to entrepreneurs. And when I first met Wayne Copeland, who I think's here somewhere, he flew me and Milton Friedman around the country in his personal jet. And the chapter in Spirit of Enterprise that I devoted to Wayne was called Sad Heart in a Personal Jet, because Wayne was worried about the world economy even back then. He's probably more worried today, I'm not sure. But he's very buoyant anyway. And, but the real sad heart today is over the collapse of monetary standards. And, but this is a time, if money is not more stable than goods and services it's supposed to measure, and if it's 73 times more transactional activity than all the trade that it's supposed to mediate, then you have what is a real reason for a sad heart. And unfortunately, the reason for this really began with Milton. Milton was a great economist, obviously, one of the greatest exponents of freedom there is, but he really blew it on money. And as he really understood by the end of his life, because money has to be a measuring stick. And in Scandal of Money, I end up concluding that money ultimately has to be a measure of time. What remains scarce when everything else grows abundant? It's time. I used to say, the speed of light, the span of life are the crucial limits, and money brings time into the economy. And when money is removed, as in all the free goods of Silicon Valley, you find phenomena like kids spending 80 hours a week on average consulting their smartphones. I mean, this means that time has dissolved from their consciousness, and it dissolves because there's no payment entailed. There's no, the whole Silicon Valley economy is sort of flying up into this levitated state where much of it is free. And I think there's a fundamental contradiction between a company that chiefly produces free goods, 250 free goods are produced by Google, and about 250 products. And it's all to be paid by advertising of products that presumably generate a cash flow. And I think this is a fundamental contradiction, and there are contradictions that increasingly pervade the current Silicon Valley model. I think that the Independence Institute should keep a close eye on the deranged thinking going on there. Meanwhile, I'm up in Seattle at the Discovery Institute. We do it up in Seattle. We're kind of a team here, but I think that this is a great opportunity for both all of us and for Trump if he can seize it, because he is right that monetary manipulation and free trade are inconsistent. They're incompatible. You can't have wild, volatile currency trading and free trade at the same time. They're just incompatible propositions. NAFTA was a good example. NAFTA, after NAFTA was passed, the value of the peso dropped 87%, from some 35 cents to under a nickel. It's gone down lower now. The problem with NAFTA was never free trade, but there was a problem because any effect of the actual regulations in NAFTA were dwarfed by this 87% change in the unit of account. And this is going on all around the world now. The central banks are believe that they can stimulate economic growth by fooling entrepreneurs by manipulating the currency, and they cherish this power, and it must be taken away. And I believe that this is the moment to do it through restoration of a gold standard, linked to new digital currencies. And I think there's a big opportunity today to overthrow this government monopoly of money that Hayek called the root and source of all monetary evil. And it can be overcome, and it doesn't. And money is not a magic wand. It is a measuring stick. And if you try to change it into a magic wand to rule your economy, you're going to have the very stagnation that we've seen in recent years. Thank you.